Hello, everybody, and welcome to Getting APIs to Work. Today, we'll have another episode of What Would the Web Do? And what we're tackling is Hypermedia APIs. We'll talk about what they are and what they can do for you. And as usual, we'll talk about what would the web do? And Mike, of course, is part of it. Hey, Mike, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. I just went for a bike ride, and that always makes me very happy.
Very, very nice. Well, I have not been for a bike ride, but I was outside before this video, which also makes me rather happy. It's good enough for me. So we're going to talk about hypermedia on this episode of What Would the Web Do? You and I have talked about hypermedia lots over the years. We've both been working on it in various ways. I've been talking about it for close to 20 years. And I think one of the things that always stands out whenever we start talking about it is, my idea of what hypermedia is and how it can be used really does come from the web. I saw a great talk by Leonard Richardson maybe 15 years ago, and he really just talked about what would the web be like if we didn't have hyperlinks, if we didn't have links, if we didn't have things to click on, and how much more cumbersome it would be. So if you can imagine, right, what would it be like if we had no address bar where you didn't type stuff in? What can you picture what the web would be like today?
Well, if you're old enough, right, you can just go back to Gopher, basically, and there you go, right? That's your web without links. It's like you can kind of navigate a hierarchy of things, but you can't really follow purposeful hyperlinks, right? That can take you anywhere. The only thing you can do is you can kind of go up and down, which is
I remember what I used to have to do is I would have to memorize addresses of content servers, right? So I would have to kind of like have some command in my links browser or some viewer that I would have, and I'd type it all in, and then there would just be lists, like you said, of content, sort of pages of content that I could open, but there was no sense of that.
Those were Gopher days?
Yeah, Gopher. That was definitely Gopher, and Waste is another one that I remember.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, Archie.
Where's that, right? So what I think makes the web so magical is that on the one hand, it is this seamless web of interconnected resources that we can surf in whichever way the resources help us surfing it. But we can always also go wherever we want by just picking a new address and saying, no, I want to go there. And what I wanted to do, and what I can't do, but at least I can hold up an old phone. This is a really old phone.
Yeah.
What I wanted to do was actually to hold up my old Motorola Razr, but I don't have it anymore. And what was so funny about the Motorola Razr is it was before the smartphone days, but it had a browser. It was kind of, the first days of the mobile web. Yeah. And the amazing thing about that browser was that browser didn't have an address bar. You couldn't enter an address. All you could do was you could select links. And when you bought the phone, you started with Motorola's homepage. And then basically you could say, okay, and where can I go now?
Yeah,
and then it was amazing. I have to say, crippling a browser so badly was a pretty amazing thing to see. But that's the opposite, right? So it had links, the browser, but it didn't have an address bar. And I think that really is the amazing structure that the web gives us, right? On the one hand, we can go wherever we want, but on the other hand, we can also be guided through this vast network of resources in whatever the designers decided would be useful ways for us to explore it. And I think that really is, in essence, is the magic that made the web work. I think if the web didn't have had that, we would be nowhere near to where we are today with the web.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I talk about a lot on this is the idea that I can simply put a link on one of my pages to link to you, and I don't have to get your permission. We don't have to have a meeting. We don't have to have any special setup or anything. We could just sort of randomly or almost anarchically, connect other things together. One of the things about the Motorola pattern is Motorola decided what the connections were, right? Motorola would tell you where you could go from here. And one of the things the web lets you do is decide what you want to do anywhere. It's a bit like the way Yahoo used to work, or the early sort of online services where you would have their menu and you would follow their menu and their steps and their hierarchy. We were very much thinking of this as a hierarchy. And Yahoo became sort of one model for the way the web would be connected, but it's not the only model, right?
Yeah, I think the problem with Yahoo, of course, was that it was very much a curated directory, basically, right? It was not really generated from the richness of the web itself. And then that is, of course, what made Google so magic and so successful, and which helped kill Yahoo very quickly. And what I also liked a lot was your mention of, the ability to link between pages without permission. And I think that is something that when we talk about APIs, right, that is something that we always stress a lot. It's like, how can you use APIs to reduce coordination overhead, to allow different teams to work at different speeds without having to have a meeting to decide, can we do this or not? And if we can do it, how do we do it? And so forth, right? So on the web, right, you just make a link, and then as long as your server is up there and running, I can use the link and everybody's happy, right? They can traverse, they can find information from let's say my page and from your page, and no meeting had to be held. And I think that is the magic that we still are missing sometimes a little bit in API land, right? The real focus on how can we decrease coupling as much as possible. I think that really should be one of the guiding principles, and we're trying hard, but I think sometimes there still is potential.
Yeah, so it's a real challenge. So to use that same analogy, I mean, what would you think of as sort of the Yahoo of APIs today? Like, what is the pattern that probably comes closest to that curated sort of hierarchical set of links? Is there something that comes to mind, like right now?
Well, in my mind, I definitely have OpenAPI, right? Which starts from like, what is an API? And your first thought, basically the main abstraction is, it's a list of resources. This is how I structure my API, right? I don't start thinking about what are the paths that people want to take, what is the information that I want to expose, and how do I expose it, and what are ways how people want to explore and experience the information. Instead, I just create that list and say, here are the 28 resources that you get. Good luck, right? And that, I think, is really kind of the pattern that OpenAPI supports, and that you find when you look at OpenAPI designs, right?
It's sort of the use case it was designed for, right? Is this idea of like, it's sort of like the Motorola case. I'm going to decide all the places you can go and how you get there, and I'm going to go ahead and document that. Is there a sort of a googly version, a Google-esque kind of version of this now, or not?
Not really, not mainstream. I think I played around for a little while with this idea of API maps, right? In the same way as you start when you design a website, you start with a sitemap, right? And you say, where do people start? What do they want to do? How do I guide them through my website in the most efficient way so that they can get their jobs done, right? And that is a very user-focused way of thinking about how to build a website. And I think we're still lacking that focus on user needs and how can we best start with the user in mind and then eventually turn that into an API. But it started with us thinking about how the user wants to get something done. And I think I still like this idea of an API map, but I have to admit that I wrote about it a little while ago and then I forgot about it and I never did anything. And I hope somebody does something in that space, but I really haven't seen anything mainstream. Have you seen something?
No, I haven't. And as I listen to you doing this, I mean, I remember sitemaps, super well. That used to be how you built websites, right? You would actually do the map first and then fill in the details on here's the about page and here's the FAQ. And I remember all that. I think one of the things that comes to mind when we're talking about this is one of the things I get from OpenAPI is this notion of endpoints, right? There's a server that has endpoints. There's a series of endpoints. And those endpoints are kind of the resources, like they would be on the map, right, on the sitemap. But when I'm thinking about hypermedia, I'm not thinking about resources. And I'm actually focusing on the link or the form or the action. The technical term was affordance, but like the thing that you do, right? So sometimes a single endpoint or resource might have lots of affordances, lots of hyperlinks on it, or lots of forms. Other times there might be just one. So I think there's a shift in focus, right? Which is this idea of I'm going to define an endpoint versus I'm going to define a hypermedia action or something. And is OpenAPI just not going to do that? Doesn't OpenAPI sort of have a plan or a way to talk about these actions in a similar way, right? They call them link objects, right?
That's what people tend to think.
Right?
So the link objects were introduced in OpenAPI 3.0, but they really don't have anything to do, so to speak, with hypermedia. Because in my mind, really, what the most important aspect of hypermedia is runtime links, right? Links that you get at runtime that for what you did already and what you may want to do next, give you the right links to go these new paths. So these are typically links, right? So let's say you want to look at a calendar, right? And then in that calendar, let's say you select a filter that says only show me these kind of entries. And now you select a link that says, and now show me the week view instead of the month view or something, right? And you would expect that this filter is still applied. That kind of would make sense, I guess, right? So that link actually would be generated at runtime and would specifically say, and here is a link to the week view resource with the filter applied. Right. And that's easy to do in programming, but that kind of thing is not at all supported by link objects. So the link objects in OpenAPI are really kind of just static links that you can say, every resource basically by definition can be assumed to have those links, but these are kind of static links that you could say, this is the link to the home page or a link to the terms of service or these kind of things. These might be useful, but I think these are almost like the least useful links you can possibly use hypermedia, right? So it's kind of
I think you just pointed something else. So one of the things we talked about before is this notion of sort of being able to connect things together without a meeting, to lower the barrier of entry for reduced coordination and that. Now you just added this other thing, which is dynamism, right? So you just basically said the way you think about hypermedia, and I think about it this way too, is it's very dynamic. It's based on the context. If I turned a few filters on, the kinds of links that I'll see or the kind of content I'll see is going to be different. Whereas the OpenAPI documents tend to sort of be relatively static, like here's all of the things all of the time kind of approach. So I think that dynamism is probably really key. And that sort of leads to what are the real benefits of the Hypermedia API? We just both used examples, I think, that were relatively process oriented. Like I'm trying to solve a problem, I'm trying to do a thing. And that maybe that's a better fit for thinking about hypermedia. Like if I want to use it, this process orientation might make a difference, right?
I think so. I think when you start thinking from the process, from the workflow perspective, right? What is, like you said, what is something that somebody wants to get done, right? Then you oftentimes, right, you end up with like this multi-step scenario. First you do this, then you do this, then you do this, and here you can do either this or that. And so you end up with this graph, right? This graph of actions throughout kind of a interlinked network of different steps that you're taking. And I think that is one of the really valuable things. And those links also, again, right, can be dynamic. So, right, so when there is, I don't know, no next week, then you don't have a link to looking at the next week or something.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, right, very seamlessly, what we also get out of this model is to say, and there's no need whatsoever that all resources in this graph are part of just one API, right? And I think that is the other thing that is so magical on the web, and why we say you surf the web, right? You can take this metaphor, I think, to great lengths, right? And say you happily surf across like this vast ocean of scary things below you. Maybe not, but it is this idea, right, that you can very effortlessly use the web without having to worry which server is it on. Do I move from one server to another server now, right? You really don't have to worry about this because the links will just take you wherever you want to go. And I think that is an even more important aspect of hypermedia that is often overlooked, that it cannot just be for API design, but actually for API design in an API landscape, right? Like we talk a lot about API landscapes in our continuous API management book, right? How important it is to always keep in mind that your API is part of a landscape, very likely, and that the goal should be to make this landscape effective and productive. And I think this is something where there's a lot of potential that hypermedia could bring that is just not yet recognized and realized enough.
Yeah, so I mean, that's, again, you just made another leap now. So now not just a dynamic within an API, but dynamic across servers, across APIs, right? So just that same idea, that sort of, I can place a link on my server to talk to your server. I could place a link on my workflow to talk to your workflow. Can you imagine where someone hosts the workflow for selecting items for a shopping cart, another one host a workflow for checking out of that shopping cart and paying for it, another one host a workflow for shipping? You could literally just sort of connect them together, you know, without asking permission, and start to build these applications that are in the ecosystem. So whether it's inside a corporation, or even like you were saying, like on the dangerous ocean where there's sharks and jellyfish and all that other stuff, I mean, this is sort of the future and sort of the potential that hypermedia could offer. But the real question is there any momentum for that? Is there any desire for that? Do you see out there people saying, gee, I wish I could surf the ocean this way, basically?
That is a very good question. I think in the abstract, what you hear is definitely a lot of like, it's fairly complicated, so many APIs. How do I get stuff done across the APIs? How do I even find them? How do I build up a catalog of APIs, right? So I think at least in the abstract, right, there is a growing feeling that the number of API resources will become harder and harder to manage because we have more and more of them, and it's kind of hard to keep track. And we do see some uptake, I think. So GitHub recently started using hypermedia, or not so recently, I'm not quite sure. Amazon has some hypermedia web services, right? So there are some major web services that use that pattern. You also see some frameworks supporting hypermedia more and more. So I would say we do see some growth. It's not, you know, it's not like the GraphQL insane curve. Now we have like a 2,000 person hypermedia conference.
Yeah.
But I still think that there is potential. I also think that people start seeing more and more that the purely resource-oriented style does have its limitations and drawbacks. And I think, you know, so you and I, right, we've been talking about hypermedia for literally forever.
Ever, yes.
And we're just doing that, and who knows, maybe we can help growing the momentum.
Yeah, I think sort of what you're saying is true. I think as the number of APIs grows, whether it's inside an organization or across organizations, and the number of APIs you want to use grows, then it gets harder to curate them, right? So I think a lot of API catalogs, a lot of internal portals are very much like the Yahoo of APIs, right? They say, go here, go here, go here. But I think as that gets bigger with microservices and Lambda functions and all these other things, we're going to have to abandon the curated version and get more like the googly version, which is you type in a search and you say, can you tell me, is there an API that handles customer management? Is there an API that handles onboarding or credit card management, so on and so forth? So I think then as we get there, we may be seeing the future sort of play out in the sense that we're going to have to start making it easier to connect. It's just going to be too complex. And we may be getting close to that. I suspect the first versions of this imaginary sort of hypermedia world will happen inside an enterprise instead of outside, because it's sort of a smaller, like you say, landscape or ecosystem. But I'm not really sure, because like you said, I've been talking about it for, it seems like forever, for decades, and it's always just about there. It's sort of like AI, right? It's like we're in a hypermedia, you know, are we in hypermedia winter? Are we about to start a new big push? I don't know.
I like the thought you just had about, you know, the enterprise. It would be fascinating. So if anybody knows of an organization where you have seen like an hypermedia champion trying to really use hypermedia at larger scale, please let us know. I think it would be fascinating to really see that play out. I could see that as something that actually could have a very beneficial side effect over time, right? The bigger your landscape gets, it's not that it becomes so much harder to use and understand. But yeah, I haven't seen that. But yeah, that would be super interesting. So if anybody knows somebody, please definitely get in touch and let us know. I'd love to see that.
There you go. There you go. So we've sorted it out, right? This idea of what would the web do without links? It would do very little, right? It's really essential. And the real question is, does that go beyond sort of the document web? Does it go into the API space? And who knows? Maybe there's somebody out there right now doing it.
Yeah, I hope so. We'll see. And I think until then, we'll just keep talking about it. We'll point people to the advantages. And then if they want to check it out, that's fine. If they say, nah, that's not for me, I guess that's fine too. So far, we seem to be doing not too bad with the more resource-oriented style that is definitely more popular. So one way or the other, I think, you know, the API world will do fine, but it would be much better with hypermedia.
That's what I think.
Okay, so thanks a lot for watching. If you like this, please give it a thumbs up. Please leave your comments if you have anything in terms of experience or some kind of feedback you want to give us. Thanks so much, Mike, once again for joining. And as usual, the next topic is top secret, but we have a long list, so there will be something very soon. Thanks a lot and bye.
Bye-bye.